The echo of gunshots in the distance was a common sound in Whisper Creek, but for Xander Forester, those distant cracks meant something else entirely. Time was running out. The year was 1876, and the small mining town perched on the edge of Colorado's unforgiving terrain had seen its share of lawlessness. But what lay beneath the Wilcox property was something far more sinister than any train robbery or saloon brawl. Rain pelted down on Xander's worn leather hat as he urged his chestnut mare forward. 3 days of searching, following whispers and half-truths that led him to this desolate homestead 5 miles outside of town. The property stood abandoned, or so it appeared, its windows dark like empty eye sockets, the front door hanging askew on rusted hinges. "Easy, Penny," Xander murmured to his horse as he dismounted, tying her reins to a weathered fence post. His boots sank into mud as he approached the house, hand resting instinctively on the revolver at his hip. He'd been tracking the notorious Wilcox family for months now, ever since they'd robbed the bank in Silver Ridge and disappeared with more than money. According to trembling witnesses, they'd taken a young woman too. The floorboards of the porch creaked under his weight. Xander paused at the threshold, listening. Nothing but the steady drum of rain on the roof. He pushed the door open, wincing at the groan of neglected hinges. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything, evidence that no one had lived here properly for weeks. "Hello?" he called, knowing full well no one would answer. The house felt hollow, abandoned, but something pulled him forward, room by room, until he reached the kitchen with its ancient cast-iron stove and bare wooden table. It was there he noticed a rug pushed aside, revealing a trapdoor set into the floorboards. Xander knelt, running his fingers along the edge. Fresh scratch marks marred the wood, and the padlock that should have secured it lay broken nearby. With a deep breath, he grasped the iron ring and pulled. The door lifted with surprising ease, revealing narrow steps descending into darkness. A faint whimpering sound rose from below, nearly inaudible beneath the patter of rain. "Hello?" he called down, softer this time. The whimpering stopped. Xander drew his gun, then reached for the lantern he carried at his belt. With the flame casting long shadows before him, he descended the stairs, each creaking step revealing more of the cellar below. The smell hit him first, damp earth and fear. In the far corner, behind stacked crates and barrels, huddled a figure. As the light touched her face, Xander felt something twist in his chest. She was perhaps 20 years old, with matted hair that might once have been a rich auburn. Her dress was torn and filthy, her wrists raw from the ropes that bound her to a support beam. But what struck him most were her eyes, wide, green, and filled with a defiance that months of captivity hadn't extinguished. "Miss?" he said softly, holstering his weapon and raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not with them. I'm here to help you." The woman regarded him warily, pressing herself further into the corner. "They'll be back," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "They always come back." Xander moved closer, slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "What's your name?" She swallowed hard before answering. "Tessa. Tessa Winters." "Miss Winters," he said, kneeling before her. "I'm Xander Forester. I've been tracking the men who took you since Silver Ridge." His fingers worked at the knots binding her wrists. "They won't hurt you again." As the ropes fell away, Tessa rubbed at the raw skin beneath. "How can you be so sure?" "Because 2 of them are in the Silver Ridge jail and the third—" He hesitated. "Let's just say he won't be troubling anyone again." Tessa looked up at him with a flash of understanding. "You're not just a tracker." "No, madam. United States Marshal." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her. Xander guided her toward the stairs, one hand at her elbow. As they reached the bottom step, Tessa paused, glancing back at the dismal cellar that had been her prison for nearly 3 months. Xander followed her gaze, then looked back at her face, still proud despite everything. "Sunlight's waiting," he said gently. "You don't live underground again." Her eyes met his, searching. Then, with a small nod, she began to climb. The rain had stopped by the time they emerged from the house, and shafts of late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds. Tessa paused on the porch, closing her eyes and lifting her face to the warmth. The light transformed her, revealing hints of the beauty that dirt and fear had hidden. A sprinkling of freckles across her nose, the curve of her jaw, the ghost of dimples when she exhaled in relief. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she whispered. Xander found himself transfixed by the sight of her, silhouetted against the golden light. He cleared his throat. "We should get moving before dark. Town's a few hours' ride." Tessa nodded, but as they approached Penny, she hesitated again. "I've never ridden before." "You'll ride with me," Xander said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "Just hold on to the saddle horn, I won't let you fall." As they set off, Tessa remained rigid, her back barely touching his chest despite the necessity of their close quarters. Xander kept his arms around her only as much as needed to hold the reins, respecting the distance she required after her ordeal. But as the miles passed and Penny's steady gait rocked them into a rhythm, he felt her gradually relax, her body softening against his. "Why did they take you?" he asked after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. Tessa was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke. Her voice carried back to him on the wind. "I was the banker's daughter. They thought they could ransom me. But they didn't send a ransom note." She shook her head. "There was a disagreement. The youngest one, Eli, he wanted to send me back. The others?" She shuddered. "They had other ideas." Xander's jaw tightened. "The men in jail they'll hang for what they did. To you and others." "And the third man? The one who won't be troubling anyone?" "He drew on me outside of Thornfield." Xander's voice was flat. It didn't end well for him. They fell into silence again. The landscape rolled by scrubby pines giving way to open plains dotted with sage and wildflowers. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in the clearing sky. "My father," Tessa said suddenly. "Does he know I'm alive?" Xander hesitated. "When I left Silver Ridge, there was still hope. But it's been 3 months, Miss Winters. Some folks, they were starting to think the worst." She nodded, absorbing this. "And my mother?" "I'm sorry," he said softly. "She took ill after you disappeared. Passed about a month ago." Tessa's shoulders stiffened, then began to shake. Xander felt her grief in the trembling of her body against his, but she made no sound. He wanted to comfort her but didn't know how, so he simply held the reins steady and let her mourn in the only privacy he could offer. When they crested the final ridge before Whisper Creek, the town lay spread before them in the valley below, its windows gleaming in the setting sun. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lamplight began to appear in windows as dusk approached. "It's bigger than Silver Ridge," Tessa observed, her voice steadier now. "Mining town," Xander explained. "Silver mostly. Brought all sorts here looking for fortune." "And you? What brought you here, Marshal Forester?" He smiled ruefully, though she couldn't see it. "Same thing that brings me anywhere. The job." They rode down into town as full darkness fell, the main street busy with the evening rush of miners heading to saloons and dance halls after their shifts. Eyes turned to watch them pass a mud-spattered marshal and a bedraggled woman on a single horse, but Xander ignored the stares, guiding Penny directly to the doctor's house at the end of the street. Doc Miller was a crusty veteran of the war between the states, who'd seen too much death to be shocked by anything. Still, his eyebrows rose when Xander carried Tessa, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion, across his threshold. "Found her locked in a cellar out at the old lcox place," Xander explained, laying her gently on the examination table. Been captive for months. Needs looking after. The doctor nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. And you'll be staying? Got a room at the boarding house, Xander said. But I'll be back in the morning. Need to send a telegram to Silver Ridge, let her father know she's alive. Doc Miller's wife appeared in the doorway, her kind face creasing with concern at the sight of Tessa. I'll see to her bath and clothes, she promised. Poor lamb looks half-starved too. Xander nodded his thanks and turned to leave, but a small hand caught his wrist. Tessa's eyes were open, watching him with an intensity that stopped his breath. You'll come back? She whispered. I'll come back, he promised. True to his word, Xander returned at first light the next day. He'd spent much of the night writing his report and sending telegrams, one to Silver Ridge, one to his superiors in Denver. The Wilcox case was officially closed, but he'd requested a week's leave before his next assignment. He told himself it was to ensure Miss Winters's safe return to her father. He refused to acknowledge the tightness in his chest at the thought of riding away. Mrs. Miller answered his knock, ushering him into the small parlor where Tessa sat by the window. The transformation was remarkable. Her hair, now clean and brushed, fell in copper waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple blue dress that must have belonged to Mrs. Miller's daughter, and though it hung loose on her frame, she looked almost like any other young woman enjoying a morning's sunshine. Almost except for the wariness that lingered in her eyes, the slight flinch when the door opened. Marshal Forester, she greeted him, her voice stronger than the day before. Miss Winters. He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his unshaven face and travel-worn clothes. You're looking well. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Mrs. Miller has been very kind. Your father sends his love, Xander said, pulling a telegram from his pocket. He'll be on the eastbound train tomorrow, should arrive the day after. Tessa's fingers trembled slightly as she took the paper, reading her father's words. Relief and something like trepidation crossed her face. 2 days, she murmured. I've taken a room for him at the hotel, Xander continued, and the railroads agreed to arrange a private car for your journey home. She looked up at him sharply. You've thought of everything. It's my job, madam. Your job was finding me, she countered. Not. She gestured vaguely at the telegram, the arrangements. Xander shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Doc says you need at least a day's rest before traveling. I thought perhaps you might like to see something of the town, once you feel up to it. The wariness in her eyes gave way to curiosity. Like what? Which was how. That afternoon, Marshal Xander Forester found himself escorting Tessa Winters down the boardwalk of Whisper Creek's main street, acutely conscious of the way conversations halted as they passed. Tessa had borrowed a shawl and bonnet from Mrs. Miller, and with her head held high, she might have been any respectable young woman out for a stroll, if not for the fierce grip she maintained on Xander's arm. They're staring, she murmured. Small town, he replied. Don't get many new faces. Especially not. He trailed off. Especially not women rescued from outlaws' cellars? Despite everything, there was a spark of humor in her voice that made him glance down in surprise. I was going to say, especially not pretty ones, he admitted. A blush crept up her neck, and she turned her face away. But not before he caught the small smile playing at her lips. They stopped at the general store, where Xander insisted on purchasing a few necessities for her journey: a comb, a handkerchief, a small bottle of rose water. When he added a leather-bound journal and pencil to the counter, Tessa looked at him questioningly. For the journey, he explained. Sometimes it helps to write things down, the good and the bad. She traced her fingers over the journal's cover. How would you know? Xander paid the shopkeeper before answering. War leaves marks, same as captivity, he said quietly as they left the store. Different kinds maybe, but marks all the same? Tessa studied him with new eyes as they continued down the street. You fought? He nodded. Union cavalry. Wasn't much more than a boy, but I saw things. He shook his head. Anyway, writing helped afterward. Still does sometimes. They reached the end of the street, where the boardwalk gave way to a small park overlooking the creek that gave the town its name. A wooden bench sat beneath a cottonwood tree, and Tessa sank onto it gratefully, her strength still not fully returned. It's beautiful here, she said, watching the water ripple over stones. Different from Silver Ridge. More alive somehow. Xander remained standing, hat in hand, his eyes not on the creek, but on her profile. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, turning it to living flame. Miss Winters. Tessa, she interrupted. Please. After everything, I think you might call me Tessa. Tessa, he amended, her name feeling strangely intimate on his tongue. I want you to know that what happened to you, it wasn't your fault. None of it. She looked up at him, her green eyes suddenly swimming with tears. My mother died believing I was dead. Or worse. She died loving you, he said firmly. That's what matters. A tear slipped down her cheek, and without thinking, Xander reached out to brush it away. The moment his fingers touched her skin, something shifted between them, a current like lightning passing from her to him and back again. Tessa drew in a sharp breath, her eyes wide and startled. Xander pulled his hand back as if burned, mumbling an apology. No, she said softly. Don't apologize. It's just, no one has touched me with kindness in so long. The words broke something inside him. Before he could think better of it, Xander sat beside her and took her hand in his. Tessa Winters, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the bravest person I've ever met. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. I'm not brave, she whispered. I was so afraid. Every day, every night, I'm still afraid. Being afraid isn't the opposite of brave, Xander told her. It's part of it. Courage is being afraid and standing tall anyway. And you, Miss Winters, are standing tall. She smiled then, a real smile that lit her entire face and stole the breath from his lungs. I'm sitting, actually. Xander laughed, and after a moment so did she, the sound rusty at first, then clearer, like a bell that hadn't been rung in too long. That evening, after seeing Tessa safely back to the doctor's house, Xander found himself restless. He paced his small room at the boarding house, then finally gave up and headed for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Jenkins was an old friend who had helped coordinate the search for the Wilcox gang. Figured you'd be halfway to Denver by now, Jenkins greeted him, pushing a glass of whiskey across his desk. Xander accepted the drink but didn't sit. Taking a few days. Want to make sure Miss Winters gets home safe. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Marshal's escort for a banker's daughter? Must be important. She's been through hell, Xander said sharply. Deserves some peace on the journey home. Didn't mean anything by it, Jenkins said, raising his hands in surrender. Just noticing you seem invested. Xander drained his glass in one swallow. She was locked in a cellar for 3 months, Tom. Anyone would be invested. Anyone would feel responsible, Jenkins corrected. Not everyone would look at her the way you did coming out of the doctor's house today. Xander set his glass down hard. I don't know what you're talking about. Jenkins sighed. Look, I've known you since you first pinned on that badge. You don't get attached to anything or anyone. It's what makes you good at the job. But that girl has a father waiting for her in Silver Ridge, Xander finished, and I have an assignment waiting in Denver. Life's short out here, Jenkins said, refilling both their glasses. People die from 100 different things: outlaws, disease, bad winters, broken hearts. When something good comes along, only a fool turns his back on it. Xander stared into his whiskey. I'm a lot of things, Tom, but I try not to be a fool. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Xander arrived at the doctor's house to find Tessa already on the porch, a book open in her lap. She wore the same borrowed blue dress, but had arranged her hair differently, with small braids framing her face. The sight of her, absorbed in reading with the sun on her cheeks, made his heart stutter in his chest. "Good morning," he called, climbing the steps. She looked up, her face brightening. "Marshal Forester. I was hoping you'd come early. Thought you might like to see something special before your father arrives tomorrow." He offered his arm. "If you're feeling up to a short ride." Tessa hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his forearm. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," he said with a smile, "but I promise it's worth it." He'd borrowed a gentle mare from the livery for Tessa, along with a proper lady's saddle. She approached the horse with trepidation, but after some gentle coaching from Xander, managed to mount with only a little awkwardness. "She won't bolt?" Tessa asked nervously, gripping the reins. "Daisy here's about as likely to bolt as a rocking chair," Xander assured her. "Just keep your hands steady and your heels down." They rode out of town at an easy pace, following the creek upstream into the foothills. The morning air was crisp, scented with pine and sage. Tessa gradually relaxed in the saddle, her eyes drinking in the landscape around them. "I never imagined there could be so much space," she admitted as they rode side by side through a meadow dotted with late wildflowers. "In Silver Ridge, the mountains press in so close. And then—" She didn't need to finish. The cellar, the darkness, the confinement. "First time I came west," Xander said. "I felt like I could finally breathe. Growing up in Philadelphia, buildings everywhere, people on top of each other. Out here, there's room." "Is that why you stayed? After the war?" He considered this. "Partly. Didn't have much to go back to. Parents gone, no brothers or sisters. And out here, a man can remake himself." "Is that what you did? Remade yourself as a marshal?" Xander glanced at her, surprised by her perception. "I suppose I did." They rode in companionable silence for another mile before Xander led them off the main trail, following a narrower path that wound up a rocky slope. At the top, he dismounted and helped Tessa down, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "This way," he said, tethering the horses to a young pine. Just a short walk now. The path ended at a rocky outcrop that jutted over the valley below. Xander guided Tessa to the edge where a natural stone shelf formed a perfect seat overlooking a panoramic vista, Whisper Creek nestled in its valley, the plains stretching eastward, the mountains rising to the west, their peaks still capped with snow despite the season. "Oh," Tessa breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like being at the top of the world." "Found this place my first week in town," Xander said, settling beside her. "Come up here sometimes to think." "And you're sharing it with me?" He smiled. "Seemed like someone who spent 3 months underground might appreciate a good view." Tessa laughed, the sound freer than before. "That's certainly true." She turned her face to the breeze, closing her eyes. "I can feel everything up here, the wind, the sun, even the space itself." Xander watched her, memorizing the curve of her profile against the sky. "Tessa," he said quietly, "when you return to Silver Ridge, what will you do?" She opened her eyes, the joy in them dimming slightly. "I don't know. Before, everything. I helped at my father's bank. Kept ledgers mostly. I suppose I'll do that again." "Is that what you want?" She looked at him sharply. "What I want?" The question seemed to startle her. "I haven't thought about what I want in so long. Just surviving was enough." "And now?" Tessa gazed out over the valley, silent for so long Xander thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke. Now I want to feel this way, always free, unafraid, with the whole world spread out before me. She turned to him, her expression serious. Is that foolish? No, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It's not foolish at all. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she saw made her reach out slowly, her fingers brushing his cheek with a touch so light he might have imagined it. Why did you really bring me here, Xander? The sound of his given name on her lips broke something loose inside him. Because I wanted to give you something beautiful, he admitted. Because He faltered, unable to find the right words. Tessa's hand came to rest against his jaw, no longer tentative. Because you what? Instead of answering with words, Xander leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers gently, questioningly, ready to pull away at the slightest resistance. But Tessa didn't pull away. Instead, she sighed against his mouth and moved closer, her free hand coming to rest on his shoulder. The kiss deepened, becoming something neither of them had expected when they rode out that morning. When they finally parted, both were breathless, Tessa's cheeks flushed with color that had nothing to do with the sun. I shouldn't have done that, Xander said, though his eyes told a different story. Why not? Tessa challenged. Because tomorrow your father comes, and the day after, you'll be gone, back to your life in Silver Ridge. And you'll be gone too, to Denver, to your next assignment. She didn't frame it as a question. Xander nodded, unable to deny it. That's the way it has to be. Says who? Tessa demanded, a fire in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. For months, other people decided everything for me when I ate, when I slept, whether I lived or died. I'm done with that, Xander. I'm done letting others choose my path. What are you saying? I'm saying that I felt something the moment you helped me out of that cellar, something I've never felt before. And I think you felt it too. Xander couldn't deny it. I did. I do. Then why are we pretending this is just a nice ride before I leave town? Why are we acting like that kiss was a mistake? Because I have nothing to offer you, he said bluntly. I'm gone more than I'm anywhere. I sleep in jail cells and under stars. The only constant in my life is trouble. Tessa's laugh surprised him. And you think I want a quiet life after everything? Xander, when you found me, you told me I wouldn't live underground again. Did you think I would just trade one kind of cage for another? He stared at her, seeing her truly for perhaps the first time not as a victim to be rescued, but as a woman of extraordinary courage and determination. What do you want, Tessa Winters? He asked again. This time, she didn't hesitate. I want to live. Really live. I want to see places like this. She gestured at the vista before them. I want to feel the way I do right now, like anything is possible. And, she added softly, I want to be with someone who understands what it means to remake yourself. Xander took her hands in his. Your father will understand, she finished. Eventually. He lost me once. He won't risk losing me again, even if it means accepting my choices. And what choice are you making exactly? Tessa's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'm choosing not to go back to Silver Ridge. I'm choosing to stay in Whisper Creek, at least for a while. And I'm choosing to get to know a certain U.S. Marshal better if he's willing. Xander's heart felt too large for his chest. He's willing, he said hoarsely. God knows he's willing. He kissed her again, there at the top of the world, with the wind in their hair and the sun on their faces. Somehow, in rescuing her, he had found something he hadn't known. He was missing a reason to stop wandering, a home that wasn't a place, but a person. When they finally rode back to town, something had changed between them, a decision made, a future taking shape. They would have obstacles to overcome, explanations to give, compromises to make. But as they passed beneath the sign welcoming visitors to Whisper Creek, Tessa reached across the space between their horses and took Xander's hand. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for finding me, for bringing me back into the light." Xander squeezed her fingers gently. "You don't need to thank me. Finding you was the easiest thing I've ever done. It's letting you go that would have been impossible." "Then don't," she said simply. "Don't let me go." And in that moment, with the afternoon sun gilding her copper hair and her green eyes full of promise, Xander Forester made a silent vow that he never would. The next day, Thomas Winters arrived on the eastbound train, his face lined with grief and hope. The reunion between father and daughter was tearful, joyous, and private. Xander stood guard outside the hotel parlor where they talked for hours, giving them the space they needed. When the door finally opened, Mr. Winters emerged with reddened eyes but a smile on his face. "Marshal Forester," he said, extending his hand. "My daughter has told me everything about her captivity, her rescue, and her decision to remain here. With you." Xander shook the offered hand, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. "Sir, I want you to know that you'll protect her, care for her." "Yes, she said you would." Winter's expression softened. "She also said you gave her back the sky. For that, I can never repay you." "She doesn't need my protection," Xander said. "Your daughter is the strongest person I've ever met. But if she'll have me, I'll spend my life making sure she never sees darkness again." Winters nodded, studying Xander's face. "I believe you will. I'll be staying a few days, getting to know the man my daughter speaks so highly of." Over the next week, arrangements were made. Tessa would remain in Whisper Creek, taking a room at the boarding house. She and Xander would court properly, with her father's blessing. Xander requested a transfer to the regional marshal's office, allowing him to make Whisper Creek his permanent base. And in the evenings, they would sit on the porch of Doc Miller's house, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors Tessa had thought she'd never see again. "I've been thinking," she told Xander one evening, her head resting on his shoulder, "about what I want to do here." "And what's that?" "The school needs a teacher. Children need to learn, especially girls." Her eyes were serious as she looked up at him. "I want them to know they have choices, that they can be brave." Xander smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You'll be wonderful at it." "Will I?" Uncertainty crept into her voice. "After everything that happened?" "Because of everything that happened," he corrected gently. "You know the value of freedom better than most. What could be more important to teach?" She settled back against him, content. "When do you leave for Denver?" 3 days, he said. "But I'll be back within a fortnight. And then—" "And then?" Xander turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And then, Tessa Winters, if you're still sure, I'd like to ask your father for permission to court you officially, with an eye toward making it permanent." Her smile was radiant in the fading light. "I'll be sure," she promised. "I've never been more sure of anything." As darkness fell around them, Xander held her close, marveling at how finding her in that dark cellar had led him to the brightest light he'd ever known. They had both been lost in their own ways, she in captivity, he in endless wandering, but together they had found something neither expected. A love as vast as the western sky, as enduring as the mountains, and as precious as the freedom they both cherished. "Sunlight's waiting," he whispered against her hair, echoing his words from that first day. "For both of us now." And in the gathering dusk, with the first stars appearing overhead, Tessa turned her face up to his and sealed that promise with a kiss.